And you're also back with Craig Stobo, because Craig's calling it a bit earlier today because I guess he's got something important to do. I imagine it might be getting on a plane, to be perfectly honest with you, flying down to gorgeous Central Otago or Queenstown and taking advantage of the snow. We'll check. Craig, good morning to you.
Good morning, Michael. Hope you can hear me well.
Yes, I can. Are you coming down to Central for the snow or not?
No. I was there last week, but I have a ferry appointment with a departing ferry to Waiheke Island to go to a charity function for Ronald McDonald House, which I'm looking forward to. One of the important charities in New Zealand. So it's an 11:15 departure time. So I thought I'd squeeze something in now, if it's okay with you.
No, that's good. Yeah. Listen, can I just say, one of the great charities, I have to say, Ronald McDonald House, they do outstanding work. I have experienced in the past their generosity. All right. Craig, yesterday, take me through this. What's a budget policy statement?
Oh, okay. So it's the annual requirement ahead of the budget itself, where they lay out principles, kind of directional issues around the next 12 months and beyond. It's not so much the budget itself, the passing out of expenditure and taxation changes. It's more about direction. So, and the important thing yesterday, really, or the last couple of days on the BPS, was there was no discussion around budget issues per se. That's going to wait till May. But directionally, the Minister of Finance is saying that at the moment we won't get back into surplus until past 2027. So a little bit longer than was expected at the update provided at the end of December. So there's nothing particularly new in there, other than it's just a tougher task, so setting us up for the budget itself in May.
Just on that, the $40 million surplus that the last government said we were going to be having 26, 27. No, Treasury forecast that in December. That's now a deficit of $3 billion. $3 billion. I'm sorry. I've said this to you before. Why do we pay people at Treasury if you can't? It's now March. In December it's $140 million, and now it's $3 billion. How could they have got the original estimate out so bad?
Yeah, and it's almost certain that that number will be different in 2027, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely certain. So I just think about these things as the results of two very large numbers, revenue and expenditure, the components of which are highly variable, and it's the direction that counts, and most importantly, the government policy reaction to those numbers.
Can I ask you why the change, Craig? I mean, you've looked at these figures. Nicola Willis makes a great play. She has been, ever since she arrived, I think even before she became Minister of Finance, that the government's finances are a lot worse than Labor and Grant Robertson let on. And it seems on a daily basis she has been proven right on that. Is that it? It's just that stuff was hidden, or that there were always a more optimistic view taken by the previous government and Minister of Finance?
Well, sometimes it depends on what programs are included in the half-yearly update and those that are not. It may be that there's a lot worse outcome for revenue because the economy's much weaker than forecast, and that means that taxation revenue, the track, is a lot lower. It may mean that the expenditure profile remains high because the transfers to those who receive job seeker are forecast to increase as the economy weakens. It will mean that the interest costs from Grant Robertson's explosion of debt from 20% to 44% of GDP at much higher interest rates than were forecast is going to mean very high single-digit interest payments that weren't initially forecast in the last 12 months. Because the Reserve Bank's keeping interest rates higher for longer because inflation's taking longer to lower. So those variables can change one side of the revenue expenditure, but have a huge impact on the difference between the two, which is, of course, the deficit that we're talking about.
So let's just get this right. When we talk about deficit surplus, it means that we're spending more money every year, or at least the government's spending more money every year than it's taking in. So it has to make up that shortfall every year until, 27, 28 now, until has to borrow that money every year just to deal with the shortfall. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Well, it's theoretically, yes, but of course you'll find in the budget that I suspect Nicola will move much faster to close that deficit by cutting expenditures with some adjustment to tax. So they're not going to sit still and just borrow for the next 3 years. They are going to with speed, Festina Lente, with speed, they're going to try and close that much faster.
Okay. She said also yesterday, and you've probably read the speech, but she said this yesterday, I think it'd be irresponsible to try and fix in one budget what has been made a mess of in 6. I don't think that would be a good course of action. I actually think it would be bad for the economy. I know it would be bad for New Zealanders. Does that mean tax cuts are not on the agenda, or what?
No, I think that's saying that conditioning us to a real issue for them, which is they want to work at pace to roll out their new initiatives that replace the previous regime, but that just takes time. So the impact of the changes they want to bring in cannot happen within the next 6 months. So the reform program will deliver changes, but you can't get that in the next 6 to 12 months. I expect the tax cuts, the threshold changes will absolutely remain, because that's the core plank that's been agreed by the coalition. So it will come, and I've said before in this program, the question is how does she cut enough expenditure to pay for those?
Yeah, well, she's not going to, is she? Because there's going to be a deficit, isn't there, for this next budget?
Well, let's just see when the budget how the latest round of expenditure cuts are going and how that impacts on that profile. Remember, that's just been rolled out now. So
she said also yesterday this, and she's obviously very cautious, she said yesterday this, and I quote, "We won't be chasing a surplus in any one particular year at any cost, particularly when that cost would be frontline public services." So obviously we're not going to go into a complete slash and bone mode, are we?
No. Well, I mean, some of the things that concern me around that is, for example, the coalition has an agreement between National and the ACT Party around sharing GST with local government. It's pretty clear that can't be rolled out, given what Nicola Willis is saying. It's just going to take some time to deliver the reforms. They're still there, but she's signalling very clearly that there are a few things that have to be tidied up, aren't there, before those reforms can come in. And she isn't going to deviate from policy goals. How quickly they can get there is a question mark.
And you've also, we're going to talk to this morning about Mayor Wayne Brown and his concepts on revenue sharing. He's sent a message to the government. I think he sent them a sort of bill about this is how much you owe us because you're not paying rates and you're not, in actual fact, discharging your own financial duties in councils throughout New Zealand. I think he's already got a no. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he's got a no on asking government to pay rates on the buildings they have and reforming the 2002 Local Government Rating Act to enable, for example, airports and port land and churches,
universities,
to pay rates. So there's this group of assets that are non-rateable, and he's questioning why that is. It's not just an Auckland thing; it's obviously a New Zealand-wide thing. And then he's asking sharing of GST on rates, which he calculates at over $400 million. So if that was available for the government, 4.5 billion. If that was available for ratepayers, it would mean a lot less in terms of rate increases. And as I said, the ACT National Party agreement does discuss how that could happen, but per our discussion just now, that ain't going to happen fast. So I think the Mayor should continue to push on those ideas that, in principle, they seem the correct line of argument, and he has a National Act agreement on GST. When that can happen is the question, given the fiscal challenges.
You also took a bit of interest last week in Chris Hipkins' State of the Nation speech. Can I ask why? Because I tend to regard opposition leaders, particularly in the first year, as almost irrelevant to the scheme of things. You don't, obviously.
No, and partly because when I read or hear or listen analysis on what the speech was about, all I got was discussion around taxation. And if you read the speech, you get a real understanding of the difficulty that the Labor Party is in. And it's titled Values Matter. But when you read through it, it's pretty clear they're in denial around why they lost the election. And their reasons were natural disasters, terrorist attack, rise in crime, the global pandemic, and the international cost of living crisis. In other words, it's all these external events that cause the problem for us. They don't talk about at all their policy responses. And you just go through each of those one by one and think about them carefully. For example, the natural disaster piece. Well, the Hawke's Bay review that came out this last week clearly says that central government should do more to reform their civil defence emergency management. Right? So that's an internal issue. It's nothing to do with the disaster itself. It's how you responded to it. The terrorist attacks resulted in a whole lot of hate speech legislation, which then got binned. The global pandemic, the responses were lockdowns, their policies. The international cost of living crisis, when you look at the IMF and RBNZ numbers on, the causes of inflation, the RBNZ took a least regrets approach and cut rates very quickly. And of course, Robertson borrowed, from $20 billion to $44 billion, which stimulated the economy. And when you look at the charts of how we were spending our scarce resources compared to everybody else in the world, we spent the second highest amount of our taxes on responding to the crisis, the pandemic, only superseded by the US. So those were things we did ourselves, nothing to do with the international cost of living crisis per se, but it's how we responded to it. And so I get this very strong sense that, Labor remains in denial about why they lost the election. And the second thing is that they roll out their values of equality, opportunity, responsibility, and fair go. But then I think about the debate our society is having today around why did you go down the co-governance track? Why do you have racial preferences in this country? And you read the words, but when you see what they did, they're a complete variance. I then read through further around how they think they're going to reposition themselves. And the statement they make is competition and individualism have been society's backing track. In other words, they think that's a philosophical reason to consider other forms of, social and political organisation. And then they comment that this year is the 40th anniversary of the Longy-Douglas government. And while they applaud some of the things that were done, including the nuclear-free legislation, they also say, or Hipkins says, we have much more mixed feelings on the economic reforms of that government. And so you can see they distance themselves from their own heritage, despite this being a year where they are required to celebrate the 40th anniversary. And then I read further down and get a quote that says, some people earn a lot more than they are worth. An extraordinary statement on values. How on earth do you judge the worth of a person and decide based on that they should earn more or less? I find that type of philosophical attitude quite dangerous. And the final thing that he says that the press have not picked up on is that Hipkins believes that Labor's challenge in the modern world is to define what the new collectivism looks like. What on earth is new collectivism?